right, so let's get to it. So I'm excited to introduce Dhonielle Clayton, and she'll be in conversation with Jason Reynolds tonight to talk about the bells. So they are both natives to this area, both native Marylanders, correct? Yes. All right. So Dhonielle Clayton is not only the author of 3 books, but also the COO of the nonprofit We Need Diverse Books. She is also the co-founder of Cake Literacy, which focuses on publishing diverse children, teens, and women's literature. Her commitment to diversity can be seen throughout her written works and by helping other authors with her editing skills that help focus on communities of color. Jason Reynolds graduated from the University of Maryland, and since then has authored 5 best-selling novels to include his latest novel, Long Way Down. And according to him, his only plan is to not write boring books. So please give them a warm welcome.
I guess I'm supposed to be moderating this thing. It's always interesting when they tell you they're taping, things get automatically far more anxious for those of us who are up here, right? Nonetheless, I'm Jason, and I just want to make sure we know that, for me at least, we're here to celebrate the release of the Bells. I know that, I've got some books out, but tonight is not my night. Tonight we're here to celebrate Dhonielle, so just so we clear, right? set some ground rules.
Whatever.
Celebrate Dhonielle. So here's the thing, though. Before we jump into it, anybody who knows me knows I'd like to be as honest as possible. So the thing is, Dhonielle publicist ain't send me the book.
She's your publicist too.
She is my publicist for one of my books.
So,
but she's more your publicist. So she didn't send me the book until like 3 days ago. And the book is 2 million pages. So I read some of it. I read as much as I could. But I just
that's good enough.
And so we're gonna have a discussion around this book. But it's not like I could come and like tell you all about the book, because then there's no reason for you to buy it anyway. And so we'll make sure that we have a healthy conversation about the themes and about all these other things. But to start, because I didn't read it, because I haven't read it, I've started it, and I plan on finishing it. Thanks to your publicist. Why don't you get Maz knows what she did, right? Or what she didn't do. Why don't you give us, just so we can start, so we can get some grounding and some footing, because not everybody knows, right? So we get some footing. Give us sort of the overview of what the Bells. It's funny because I want to say the Bells are, but the Bells is about.
Bad grammar. So the way I pitch it to kids is that it's like Scott Westerfeld's Uglies. I don't know if many of you have read that series, but set in like Marie Antoinette's court. It's set in a world where everyone's born looking degenerative and sort of gross, but there are these women called the Bells that can change you down to your bones for the right price. I wanted to deal with some of the anxieties I had when I was 12 and 13 about what I looked like, and if I had the opportunity to try on different looks and change my hair, my skin, my eyes, my facial shape, my body, my height, everything. And I wanted to build a world around sort of that premise, that you can change everything, your personality as well.
So let's talk. Look, those of us who write books knows that especially if you're writing a book like this, which is taking place is this an alternate?
Yeah.
So here's the other thing about me you should know. I don't know a lot about fantasy. I don't know why Dhonielle asked me to host this thing. I don't know a lot about fantasy.
I wanted to torture him because he does not read genre.
So because of that, I also have some questions, right? So is this considered an alternate reality, or is this
I like this vocabulary.
Is this what's the one that everybody's doing? The dystopian? There you go. Is this dystopian?
No, because to have a dystopia, you have to have a utopia. So this is a secondary world. It's not our world. It's completely different. Like Game of Thrones.
But there are elements, so I read this thing recently. I read this thing from Holly Black. Do you guys know Holly Black?
Ooh, if you don't know her, you need to know her.
So I read. There's an incredible lecture that Holly Black has given around the rules of fantasy. Right, like this is how these are the rules that one must have in a fantasy novel. And have you read this?
Oh,
Or
yeah.
You heard this speech, and
She taught me how to write.
It's really incredible, and any of you writers in the crowd who want to write this kind of work, I think it'd be really helpful for you. And one of the things she says at the end is that basically, your fantastic world is not at all like you're writing about a world that does not exist except you aren't, right? Like that's always the point. This is never about the thing that it's about. It's always about our world, our lives, right? Shrouded in sort of new elements and fantastic sort of components, but this is about our world. This seems obvious. And so my question to you is it actually that obvious, and what are some of the nuances? Because I think that when it comes to young adult literature, when it comes to young adult genre writing, young adult contemporary writing, there's all this hubbub about young adult work not being sophisticated enough, which of course those of us who write it and work in this world knows is nonsense. And is really sort of silly and stupid. And so my question to you is, what are some of the nuances that you were really trying to get at? What are some of the comparisons and the analogies between the world that you created, the world that we live in? What's the obvious? What are the obvious sort of things? And what are the things that some of us may be like, oh, that's actually an interesting thing to think about that it may not be so obvious?
Your questions are hard. Well, the obvious thing is that I'm writing about plastic surgery, right? Something in our world that a lot of people do and a lot of teens do and a lot of grown-ups do in order to attain a standard of beauty. I'm also writing about magazines and propaganda around women's bodies and what they should look like, and the commodification of women's bodies, how they are sort of treated as objects to be consumed and to be talked about and to be measured and weighed and ranked. So those are sort of the obvious things, and I built a world around that. I took it out of our real world because I feel like it's sort of easier to talk about those really tough topics. Talking about bodies is really difficult. And if I take it out of our real world context and put it somewhere that's not real, we can sort of lean into the discomfort that is placed upon talking about weight and color and race and hair texture and trends and how these things have changed over time. The thing that I would say is nuanced that Justina Ireland is going to get me, so I'm going to out myself before she gets me online, is that I wanted to...
This is being taped, by the way.
I know. I'm doing it on purpose because she's like been texting me. She's like, bitch, you wrote a book about slavery. And I was like, I did. But nobody is really talking about that because it's groups of women, it's groups of girls that are sequestered away with their mothers who teach them how to service others. And they are almost bought and sold and to perform a specific task for a world. And it's based on the economy of that world.
I was going to ask about that so I read the first 4 or 5 chapters. Is all I could get, is all I could get through before this event, and it felt a lot. So I have a few questions. One, why is it the world that we exist in this book is called, I would say Orleans, but Orleans, all right?
Get it fancy.
That's what Orleans is what it is, but Orleans.
Orléans.
Right, exactly.
It's your French, right?
Exactly. So my first question is, given the history of New Orleans, let me not lead you. My question is, what exactly was there significance around naming the place Orléans, right?
That was good.
And also, is there, because when I was reading it, and you were talking about the slavery, when I was reading it, it was really difficult for me to not think about madams. Mm-hmm. And I mean madams in terms of sex work. I hope this was going to be an honest conversation. I don't know. But I also thought about madams in terms of sex workers and the job of a madam or a pimp, for that matter, would be to convince the people that work for the madam that what they do is beneficial to society, that what they do is a gift to the world, that they're doing a service, even if that service is hurting them and hurting the people around them. As long as the madam can convince them that this is a service, they're willing to carry that service out. And so I thought about that. And lastly, in the beginning of the book, when they're doing all so there's this big it's like a carnival almost that they go to, and they have to display their skills as young women who can make other women beautiful.
Yep.
But they're young. And so the other question is about children being forced to do these things. I'm trying so hard not to give away the little bit that I do know.
Don't spoil it. This book came out of, I was reading about the free colored class in New Orleans. And I was reading about these beautiful octroons and quadroons and mulattoes that became the wives, the young wives at 15, 16, 17 of rich white planters. And then I was reading about a lot of brothels and brothel culture in New Orleans, and I wanted to do a beauty brothel. And so you you nailed me, which is annoying. It's really annoying. You and Justina just be getting me, so I can't do nothing. So yeah, I wanted to talk about brothels, but I wanted to use beauty as the currency that's traded. And I stumbled upon this weird thing where there were these coins that were found in ancient Greece, and they were coins that were used, that you could only use in brothels. And they featured the sort of the sex act, and you had to bring those specific coins to those brothels, and that's the only way that you could buy. I know you know, because of your book. And I found that nugget, and I was like, this is interesting. What if there's a whole subculture, another world, another form of currency to be traded for a different set of actions? So I found that, and that sort of led me down a rabbit hole. And I'm fascinated by New Orleans. Family's from Mississippi, right next door, and I'm fascinated by that culture and the mixing of French and African and indigenous and what came of that, and power and blood. So those sort of obsessions sort of coalesced and came together and showed up in sort of my world building.
So let's talk about some craft stuff. What? Because I'm as somebody who doesn't write fantasy, I'm always, and for those of you who don't write fantasy but read it, I'm sure you're also as fascinated as I am by the idea of like world building. Because I mean, we all have to world build, right? Every writer has to world build because the world doesn't exist until you put it on the page, even the world that we live in, right? The famous Hitchcock quote is that a human face is not a face if there's no light on it. Once you put light on it, then it becomes a face. The same goes for the world. And so I guess my question is, when it comes to building worlds for you, one, first of all, why write fantasy? Alternate, what are we calling this fantasy?
Yeah.
Okay.
This ain't real.
I'm learning, man. I'm listening. I'm just trying to be as honest. I'm learning. You know what I'm saying? Why?
You're gonna be writing magic soon.
I'm working on it.
I know.
It's a secret. I'm working on it.
Sorry. Whoops.
It's on camera. But why?
Why magic?
Why magic? Why magic and why magic in this way? I mean, even the language of this, like the way, and you always see once you start reading it, for those of you who've already read it, you know that the language is super lush, right? It's almost as though, like the language is sort of a lyrical representation of the fleur-de-lis, right? Like it literally is the fleur-de-lis, right? Like the language and the way that it's written, which to me I found intoxicating. And you know, I'm hard on everybody.
You are.
But I found it intoxicating. I found it maximal in a way that wasn't annoying, right? Sometimes it's like, all right, this is a little masturbatory. Like, you know what I mean? It's like, but I did. I found it deft in an interesting way, and really, really, really sort of just, it's lovely. The language is lovely. And so my question is, one, why magic? Why fantasy? Why this kind of work? And two, talk a bit about the lexicon. I think you did some really interesting things language-wise.
I'm gonna put my dad on blast, who's in the back with the hat on. Don't hide. I grew up taking books off of his bookshelf, and it was all fantasy. It was Dune, it was Asimov, it was Lord of the Rings and The Hobbit, and it was comic books every Saturday, and it was The Dark Tower. That's what we heard in the tape decks on the way to school. So magic was always around me. It was something that I was interested in, and all the stories that I read growing up were realistic. They were Mildred Taylor and Walter Dean Myers and our greats, which are wonderful, but I was also looking for the magical versions of them because I wanted to go through the wardrobe into Narnia. I wanted to go to outer space. I wanted to be the princess. I wanted to know what fantasy landscapes looked like with brown people in them. And we didn't have them. We had Octavia Butler, but after you read all of her, then I'm looking for more. I wanted hundreds of those books. So I blame my dad for that because he was a big fantasy, sci-fi nerd, comic book head. So There's that. And then with the lexicon, I did it on purpose. People are lighting me up in my reviews too. They're like, oh my gosh, you know what I mean? This is so lyrical, but it's supposed to be. It's supposed to be thick like pudding. That's what Holly Black taught me how to do. She said you create an atmosphere, and that atmosphere should mirror the things that you're trying to talk about in the world. And I'm trying to talk about consumption and women's bodies being consumed. And so using color and food sort of mirror that. So when you're in it, I want you to fall in it, and you can't sort of escape.
Super excessive, like
yes.
it's mad overwritten, right?
Yeah.
In the best way, right? Like sometimes we have to do that, right? Like there are things that belong in a sparse space, and there are things that should be luxe and lush and dense, and so I'm really as dense as the gowns that they wear, right?
Yeah.
I think that's an important element. Shout out to Pops, by the way. My father did not read any of those things, and so I'm just, you know what I mean? And I am not the better for it. So,
he did other things.
Well, I mean, he did do other things. You're right. My father did do other things.
Mr. Allen.
And true dystopia, right?
Yeah.
Let's talk about blackness. I just feel like we got to jump in there at some point. So let's talk about. I mean, God. Anyone who's ever been to anything that I've been at, been like, here it comes.
Here it goes.
I just think that we shouldn't skirt around any of that. I think that we should attack those things head on and sort of get at the heart of the matter.
Yeah.
Because it does matter that the characters in this book are brown and are dealing with brownness, right? Like when we're talking about, it's interesting, right? Because whenever we're talking about like the gradations, this idea that like I want to be darker, I want to be lighter, all of that exists within a brown world. Like there is no other world, right? It exists anytime there's conversation about colorism, right? It exists, especially when it comes to like I want to be lighter or darker. That exists within a brown space by proxy. It exists within a brown space. And so my question is, besides the obvious fact that you are a brown woman, right? And furthermore, when it comes to plastic surgery, so just to make a final point about this question, when it comes to plastic surgery, it was assumed and has been assumed for a very, very, very long time, up until recently, that black people did not get it.
That's right.
Right? Like the assumption was that black folks did not go under the knife for physical reasons, right? We went under the knife for health reasons. Sometimes.
Right. Or we avoided.
Even then, right? So the idea that you're discussing brownness and blackness, and perhaps race isn't necessarily an explicit thing in this novel and in this sort of fantastic world, but the fact that you are alluding to blackness and brownness and plastic surgery, which is a very new conversation in our community. For those who don't know, it's a new conversation, and we used to laugh at y'all, like, yo, look at them, chopping up their bodies, and now we're all scratching our head, like, oh no, it's seeped in, right? Oh no, we're drinking the Kool-Aid, right? Yeah. And so I guess my question is, like, why? Like, just talk. Or rather, let me just say this. Let me leave it open. Just talk about that, if you don't mind, a little bit.
I think when you're one of the only brown kids and surrounded by white girls, those cultural norms press upon you. So I grew up where, and you dogged me for it, I grew up in the suburbs. I was the fly in the milk. So I was also influenced by white beauty norms, like all black women are in this country. And I did not want to recreate those norms in this world because we're already terrorized by them in the real world. So I didn't want readers to come to my world and find the same hierarchy where blackness is bad and whiteness is good, but rather those trends change daily and that we are chasing this perfection. Sometimes being brown is in and being black as the night sky and blue is most coveted and everyone does it. And then other times it's being white as milk. But I wanted to lean into the impulse of change because when I was a teenager, I had really bad acne and I was willing to do whatever it took to get rid of that. And I remember going to dermatologists and them telling me and warning me, well, we don't really know what these things do to brown skin. You're going to get a keloid or you're going to have hyperpigmentation. So I never had doctors that could tell me what would happen to brown skin with all of the medications, with all of the injections. They didn't have the science, they didn't have the research. So I was out there flying blind, trying these products and then having these dark marks and trying to figure out like, oh no, this is not for me. Trying on these instruments of white beauty. And I wanted to take those things and have this conversation with all girls, brown girls included, and put them in the front of it to talk about what we're willing to do to ourselves in order to chase these trends that are meaningless and that morph and move. So I wanted to talk about race without talking about race and without villainizing or terrorizing people who are already terrorized by Eurocentric beauty standards. So.
Wow, that's interesting.
Yeah.
Do you think that all children's literature needs to have a message?
No, I think it needs to be honest. I think it needs to tell the truth. And so when you tell the truth, you impart a message, in my point of view, because you're holding up a mirror to the world or holding up a mirror to yourself. I'm a narcissist. I write about myself. This is my therapy. So I take something that bothers me and I wrap a world around it. My first series, Tiny Pretty Things, is set in a ballet boarding school. It's about perfection and obsession, something that I dealt with in high school. This is also about perfection, but it's also about ambition and wanting to be the best. And I'm a very ambitious person, as you know, but there's such a dark underbelly to being an ambitious woman. Women aren't supposed to be ambitious. They're supposed to be sweet and soft and docile. And I am not any of those things, and neither is my character. And I wanted to deal with female spaces and women who are willing to go for everything and what happens when you do that. Yay!
Word up.
Ladies!
Word up. What did you learn about yourself when writing this? Because I mean, you know,
Yep.
I mean, all of us in there. There are some buddies in here
I see ya.
who write these books, and there's at least for me, there's always something in the process that I learn about me or that we learn about ourselves, and we're trying to construct these stories that we swear we're going to gift to the world. Right? So what surprised you, or something that you were like, oh snap, I'm even more of a narcissist than I thought, right?
I figured out that I'm the villain in my stories. So you haven't met the villain yet. When you meet
I'm getting there.
Yeah. And I figured out that I took the worst parts of my teenage self, looking at my journals and looking at sort of remembering the things that I used to do, and I put it in there. And I figured out that I'm not over any of this stuff. So this body stuff, I'm not over it. So I'm not giving teens something that's like, oh, I put it all in there and then, oh, I'm good now. No, every time I look in the mirror, every time you go past, you're like, ooh, I could go to the gym, or ooh, I could get a cream for that. I'm not over it. And so I think I learned that it's really hard when you go, especially to the spa, and you take off your clothes and you lay on that table and you see yourself in the mirror and you see all the little lumps and things. It's, I'm not over it. And I'm a grown-up.
Yeah.
I'm still the 12-year-old that was figuring out, like, oh, this is what happens to your body as you grow up. I'm still not over it. I'm still working it out.
I think the secret, the strange secret that we never talk about is that men also feel the same way.
Yeah.
That young boys also feel the same way. That there's no way for us to know if our bodies are sufficient, right? And so most of us grow up thinking that they're not, or pretending that we know that they are, even though we actually don't, right? I was at the doctor yesterday. He told me I was obese.
What?
Yeah.
While your BMI is off?
Yeah,
They told me that,
He
too.
was like, you gotta lose like 30 pounds. I was like,
30?
Yeah, hand to God, this happened yesterday. And the crazy thing, my hand to God, this happened yesterday, 30 pounds. And I was like, sir, and look, and so when that happens, look, there are the insecure part of me, right? My ego kicks in. It's like, sir, I'm 34 years old. I feel like I'm holding on, right? And then his response was, it doesn't matter. Like, you gotta lose 30 pounds. You're technically obese. And then the other part of my insecurity kicked in, and immediately as you start thinking, right, about all the things that I have to live with every single day that I never actually have to tell anybody, because men in our society are expected to not have any of these issues, even though all of us technically do,
Yeah.
right? All of us do. And so if you are a man and you are wondering whether or not this book is for you,
It is.
or if you are a young man for that matter, or if you are a parent or a teacher and you think this is a book for young ladies, I think you are sadly and sorely mistaken. I think that we need to start using these books to also pick apart some of the toxicity of masculinity and the things that so many of us have to carry, right? Women have to carry heavy weight, most of which we inflict. Men also have to carry the heavy weight, which is why we inflict it, right? It's a transfer of energy. That's what's happening, right? And so maybe we should start talking about some of the ugly stuff that we all. You know how many times I'm always like, yo, I wonder if I should shave my chest, right? Because and you know it's crazy, right? And the wild thing is that there are men in this room who shave their chests all the time for that very reason. Because every time we turn on the TV or look at ads, I'm like, yo, how does man's chest look like that? Like he's 40 years old and he got a full beard and no hair nowhere else on his body. Right? That's real.
No, it's real.
A real thing.
And in the world, there are men that are just as obsessed with their outer forms and go through, she will work on men as well and have these beauty treatments and these beauty sessions with men as well. They are just as neurotic and obsessive about them. But also, I wanted to lean into how personality and talent and power are related. So the bells have 3 things that they can do. They can change your manner, which is your personality, and give you a talent. They can also change your body down to your bones, whatever you want. And then they can also erase your age. So the men I wanted to lean into, because when I was talking to, hey, Russ.
What happens when you late, bro?
Yeah.
What happens?
I wanted to lean into, I asked a lot of friends, a lot of male friends and female friends, what are the things about your body or about yourself that you don't like, that you would change if given the opportunity? And I asked for only 3. Women would send me back 7 to 10 things. Men would send me back 5. But on that list of 5, 3 usually were physical, and then 2 were related to money or height or sort of personality. They wanted to be funny, they wanted to be charming, they wanted to be smart. And those were factored into their visions of themselves. And I found that to be interesting in the way that the 2 sexes sort of approached this sort of idea of modification. Women would change everything. Everything.
Men are liars, by the way.
Yeah, absolutely. Stay lying.
It's a faulty list, let me tell you. That's ridiculous.
But I wanted to lean into that, though.
Yeah, exactly, right? Like, I mean, I think that's the genius. When you all read it, you'll see. I think that's the genius of the book, right? This idea that like you'll find your insecurity in there. You'll read it and you'll find yourself, right? And I think that's a powerful thing, especially because I think this conversation right now is more important than perhaps it's ever been. I mean, because of the new age of social media and technology and the outing of ugliness when it comes to all of these things, whether it be the Me Too movement, whether it be people literally ruining their bodies, or whether it be butt injections, which are ruining people, or I mean, all these sorts of things that are happening all over our country and parts of the world. I think it couldn't be more timely.
Yeah, I came from California, from
LA.
LA.
I was in Miami 2 days ago.
Yeah.
And I was like, this is like a fantasy novel, right?
Right. It was funny when you say that, because I was walking, and nobody walks in LA. I didn't know that, but it's nice. It's 70 degrees. I just got back from New York. I'm walking, and this man heckles me, and he's like, oh, well, I know your butt is real because you don't have those toothpick legs. And I was like, really? Out the car? And then I turn the corner, and I see 3 women with the butt implants and the toothpick legs. And it was like, oh, this is interesting.
Sometimes you gotta have those both and moments. It's like, that brother, you are wrong for harassing me on the street, but you are right.
And that's what happened.
Both and, right?
I couldn't be mad at him. I was
both
like,
and, you know what I mean? Before we open it up for questions, because I want to make sure we get everybody's question, let's talk about the book cover. Because I think those of us in the industry and those of us who buy books regularly know how important this is. Right? Like, this is a big, big deal. This isn't like, we shouldn't let this slide. Like, it's like, oh, that's a pretty cover. No. This is a big deal for a lot of reasons. And so can you just talk a bit about the process, about the book cover? Was there pushback? Did you have to fight for this? You know, how, like,
tell the story?
People are fighting for this, yeah.
Yeah. I was actually scared. I didn't want a brown face on my cover because I thought bigoted buyers would come into the bookstore and say, that's not for my grandchild, that's not for my kid, because that's what happens. That's how racism and bigotry shows up in the economic system. It's like, oh, that's for those kids, not my kid. So when they first showed me mock-ups, I remember whining in your phone about it. I was like, oh no, they're gonna put this girl in a dress. And mind you, the history of that is there's been hundreds of books of white girls in sort of ball gowns, but never brown girls in ball gowns. So I was afraid. I was honestly afraid. And then when they brought me in, I got to choose the girl. I wanted the girl with the frizziest hair. And they made the dress for her. I realized that it wasn't about me. It was about everyone who came behind me and the girls that didn't get to see themselves and my 10, 11, and 12-year-old self that needed to see that so that I could see myself reflected in a fantasy world. So I got over it real quick. And they did an amazing job. This was all Disney. They were like, we're gonna do this. We are going to be the first, and we're gonna go big, and we're gonna show generation of readers, because iconography and images are important. It's just like the image of President Obama is important. It shatters ceilings because it shows you that you can be that. And they wanted to do that for me, and they made this book the most beautiful thing that they could do. So.
Shout out to Disney. Disney be getting it right sometimes.
They do. They got you right with Miles.
They got me right.
They got you right.
I mean, I fight for mine, but they got me right. You know what I'm saying? Nah, they were good to me. Lastly, before we open it up, I just gotta say, I'm so happy to read a story about brown people who not poor.
Shut up. Here we go.
I'm just, no, that's real, right? Like, I just am so happy. I think there's enough, I think that we have to continue to look at brown children sort of as polyliths, right? Like, the reality is that there are a gazillion different versions of the black and brown child, of the child of color, and I think we typically only see them in every iteration of life, whether it be real life or fantastic life or alternative life or dystopian life. We only see them as sort of objects of pain and poverty, this weird sort of pornography that we spin around the black and brown child. So even though these young ladies are not in the best situation, it did me good just to see them all in fancy gowns and to read about them in sort of an opulent setting. You know, it feels like they're in like all these palatial spaces and all. I mean, it's really something to read, and it just felt good to know that some little black girl is gallivanting around this space doing magic, turning people pretty, for better or for worse. You know what I'm saying? But she ain't broke, and I like that.
No, she's not broke, and
I know that's your thing. I know you don't like that. You know what I mean? I'm just saying.
Yes.
All right, did we go too far? All right, pull it back. Let's open it up.
He's always giving me the blues.
Let's open it up. Please put your hands in the air. Let me hear from you.
Don't be shy, please. Jennifer.
Hello, long-time listener.
Hi. I love you so much.
I remember reading an article, an interview with you, and you said you had a room in your childhood home that was just filled with magazine images of the perfect person you wanted to be, and you were scared to go back in it.
Yeah.
Did you go back in that room?
No, I haven't, because my mother has put a whole bunch of crap in that closet. So yes, in my childhood room, there's like a little reading nook, which I loved. When they built the house, they built that for me. You go in the closet and you can push the clothes back, and there's like a little door that's the size of a hobbit. And you go in there and there's a little secret room. And I would do a lot of reading and crafts and journaling. But when I turned like 12 and 13, I got obsessed with magazines. And so mom and dad wouldn't let me subscribe to them unless they were highlights, and nobody wants to read highlights when you're like 12. You want to read 17 or Cosmo, even though you don't know anything about those magazines at that time. So I got them from the public library, and I cut them up, and I returned them. And it was savage. It was bad, and it came back to haunt me because I was a librarian for 6 years in New York, and those kids stole my books all the time. So just know I got it. I got it back, but I was obsessive, and I would cut out pictures and paste them up of all the people that I thought were beautiful and all of the people that I thought I wanted to be like, and I didn't know that it was photoshopped. We didn't have the internet. I'm dating myself. Not yet. That dial-up, not yet. So I didn't know. The AOL accounts weren't there. I didn't have any media literacy. I didn't know it was good lighting, and it was airbrushing, and it was Photoshop and that. I thought women's legs looked like that. I thought they were hairless and poreless. And their hair was always shiny, and why didn't my puffy hair catch the light? So I was always obsessed with those things. Spraying that sun in, like the white girls. Girl, it was rough. But yes, I haven't been back in there only because there's junk in the closet. And I'm a little bit nervous about going in and seeing what's still there.
I'd like to ask the
Oh,
question.
Dad.
You've never told me which gives you the most satisfaction, writing a villain or a hero.
Okay. Yes. Okay. I'm more interested in villains than heroes. So and every time I go to see a movie with my dad, I go see all of the movies with him. I'm all about the villain. I'm really not into the hero. So like I love my girl, who's the hero, but my villain is like my favorite, and she's not nice. But I like the villains because they have to have a complexity. There has to be a reason why. They are the hero of their own story. So I'm just more interested in darkness than light, and always have been. Good question, Dad. I did not plant that. He did that.
You have in this book that has beauty as a form of slavery, a matriarchal society. What is the reasoning behind having that kind of framing where it's the queen is actually chosen? I'm not trying to give anything away, I apologize. The queen is chosen to be this one thing, and everyone else is allowed to change, and yet you have these women that are forced to make those changes to other women.
Well, I wanted to talk about spaces full of women and how women uphold systems of oppression. Because when we learn about slavery in this country, we always talk about the white men. We don't talk about the white women. And I wanted to talk about women who uphold these systems and how it's almost worse because then we turn on each other. And I wanted to talk about how whenever there's a fight with girls, the words fat, bitch, ugly are the first slurs, even if they don't apply to you. The way we turn on each other and terrorize each other using the words of the oppressor in order to divide us, I wanted to sort of clean our own house and talk about that. In this past election, I was really bothered. I was going through my last round of revisions during it, and I was very bothered by how women turned on each other with the candidacy of Hillary Clinton. And I wanted to dig into that. I wanted to know why we do that to each other and why behind every sort of man in a hood, right, he goes home to a woman. And I wanted to dig into that, and that was something that bothered me. And so that's why I dealt with systems of oppression that are upheld by women and reinforced by them. We just have to clean out our closet. And I felt like talking about beauty, something that connects us all. Our bodies connect us all. We are all consumed, whether we are fat or skinny, ugly or pretty, doesn't matter. We are all consumed. And something I learned from reading Roxane Gay and listening to her, doesn't matter. We are connected by that. And I thought using beauty would be the thing that would have all women come to the table, no matter what they looked like or their political ideology. So that's why. Yeah, it was great.
Hi, my name is Trin. I just want to ask, do you know the name of the woman on the book cover? And also, do you agree with me that she looks just like Taraji P. Henson?
Everyone keeps saying that. They keep tagging Taraji too and being like, your daughter's here. I forgot her name. I follow her on Twitter. She's like 19 and she lives in Philly and she's very sweet. I can find her on my Instagram, but she's lovely. Oh, they put her name in there? Oh no, don't out Disney. But no, I forgot her name, but she's wonderful, and I follow her on Twitter. I'll have to look it up, but she's wonderful, and she's 19. And yes, they did style her to make her, it's the way her face looks when she turns. Yeah, it's the expression. It's fierce. Oh, shit. Excuse me. Yeah.
Will you tweet it out when you remember it?
I will, definitely. She's great. She's like 19 and, living their life as a 19-year-old. The struggle. Yes.
Hi.
Kazoko.
You talked a lot about how this book and this cover kind of opened doors for people and how you're looking back for the people that are coming after you. But in many ways, you as an author are opening doors for people, and you are going to be the shoulder that many young authors the giant shoulders that people stand on. So if you could tell your younger self something that could help other brown authors coming after you, what would it be?
Oh, Kasoko, I'm gonna get you after this. We are gonna fight. I would tell other writers coming behind me to read everything and know what you're talking about, always, so that you can't be denied, right? Know this industry inside and out, know the books that are published, know where your book will be in the bookstore, know the business, and then focus on your craft. Make it better than everything else that's out there. And focus on that, because that's all that you can control, really. You can know your stuff and make sure your story is good, so that when you come out in the world, people are always going to say no. They're always going to give you bad reviews or whatever, but if you feel good and you know that you did everything you could, then nobody can tell you really anything. And I already know you're doing that. Because Kasoko has a book that'll be coming out. I was going to embarrass you. Next year, right? Is it spring 2019? Summer 2019. Yes. Yeah.
What's the name of the book, man? What is it? A Place for Wolves. It's called A Place for Wolves, if y'all want to check it out. Come on Goodreads. I just want to add real quick to that advice. The other thing is, like, know everything, but also know yourself. Like, because the truth of the matter is, a lot of the work that we do has everything to do with you just doing your thing. Like, do your thing, right? And I mean that, like, literally, like, do your thing, right? Because the truth is that most of us who figure it out or who find our voices only find our voices by breaking rules and by fighting against the academy and all the things that we're taught. A lot of this is gut work. I don't know how to use most of the punctuation that we're supposed to know how to use, but I trust myself and I know what feels good and sounds good. Like, know yourself, right? Like, know yourself and do your thing, and you'd be surprised how far that takes you.
Anyone in the back also have questions? You can just come up. I'm going to get him, then you. Okay.
So I'm 14, and in my 8th grade English class, we were learning about societal norms in the books The Giver, and we also read a short story called The Censors. I don't know if you've read it, but did societal norms in books or short stories like those really influence you in this one?
I'm a former teacher and a former librarian, so I've read The Giver several times. Of course, societal norms, because I think of it as societal programming. And so what I like to do is, and think about children's books and books for teens as tools and instruments for cultural programming and telling us the codes, who's pretty, who's ugly, who's powerful, who isn't. And yes, I feel like we are all soaked in that sort of ether and all of those issues, and books like The Giver dig into that. And I wanted to take the societal programming about bodies and talk about that in my book. So I chose a specific lens. And that came from, you all should read him, Scott Westerfeld, who's the champ. He said, if you want to write fantasy, think of the world, answer this question: what in the world does everyone want, and what are they willing to do to get it? And that's how I figured out how to write this book. And I picked beauty. You gonna drink my water? Oh yeah.
Hi, so I had a question. You've talked a lot about your inspiration for where all the ideas for this book came from and the frustrations you've had and how to turn that into a story, which is incredible, because I think a lot of people just get frustrated and it turns into chaos in our brains. So to take that and turn it into something productive is amazing and mind-blowing. But I was wondering, when you set out to write a book and outline these things that you want to achieve, do you always know where it's going to finish, or does the book ever become like a character in and of itself, and like, just, are you ever surprised by where it goes?
Yes. I'm a person that I can only, they call them that, like headlight writers. I don't know if you've heard this before, where I know there's plotters, people who plot all the way through, who are architects. There are gardeners or pantsers who just sort of write until they figure out their way. And I'm sort of in the middle. My writing partner, Sona, is a plotter and an architect, and I'm not allowed to write with her without having a plan. But since I wasn't writing with her for this, I'm a headlight writer, so I picked like 5 or 6 things that I knew I wanted to do, and then I figured my way to connect those dots. I think my friend Victoria Schwab does that too. It's like 5 or 6, and then I find a way to connect them, but I always know the beginning and I never know the ending. I turn in every draft without a tail, and then my editor's like, all right, this is how we're gonna end it. I apologize for the ending of this book. But I try to let myself figure it out along the way. I just don't know when I start. What about you? Do you know everything? I know you don't know.
I do AQZ, you know what I mean? I know the beginning, I know the middle, I know the end, and then I get busy. I always write an extra chapter at the beginning and the end and throw both away. So we always start a chapter late, we always end a chapter early, and the rest of it is sort of just figuring out. If it's not an adventure to me, it won't be an adventure to you. I get bored super, super easily.
And when you plot it all out, sometimes it's like, oh, well, I already did this, so why write it? Yeah.
I never thought, in school, when they had you outline, I used to be like, wait, you want me to do the work before I do the work?
You wasn't doing the work.
Thank you. Any other questions?
And Tiffany Jackson has one in the back, too. She is the author of Allegedly and Monday's Not Coming. Yes, I did.
So when you do the world building, how much of that is front loaded? How much of it do you know the rules of how the place works and the structure and the hierarchy, and how much do you ever get to a point where you say, oh, that's not going to work because the rule is this, and then that alters does that make sense?
It does.
The way you go through the rest of the story.
Yes, before I write any fantasy world, you have to figure out the rules of the magic. You have to know them, because then you have to know magic has a price, magic has limits, otherwise it's boring. If we could just do what we want without consequences, no, that doesn't make for good tension. So I always write out my rules of the magic and limits and what are the worst things that could happen. And then I sort of build everything from backwards from that point. So I answer that question, what is it that everyone wants in the world, and what are they willing to do to get it, and then what are the rules? If I lived in this world and moved through it every day, what would that look like? Sometimes I'll just write out a day in the life of a person in the world. Do you do that? Contemporary writing too, you have to build a world. I have to believe you that I'm in Brooklyn, or I'm in New York, or I'm in DC. So how do you do it?
I just treat every environment like a character, and every character like an environment. So, and then you create relationship between those two paradigms, right? So, like if I'm talking about, let's say we're in Brooklyn, or let's say we're in DC. Let's say we're in Northeast DC. I would need to build this world. Like Northeast DC itself would have to be a character. It would have to have feeling. It would have to have emotions. It would have to smell a certain way, and it would have to move a certain way, and walk a certain way, and talk a certain way, right? And then if I was the person, then the protagonist that I'm creating would have to be an environment. That environment would have to have places. It would have to have movement within it, within the person. It would have to have traffic within the person. It would have to have sound and noise and all these things, and then you create relationship between those two elements. So that's sort of, my process.
And you're a poet, so all of that. Tiffany Jackson.
Ooh. Hi.
Hi.
Oh,
She's a wonderful author, by the way. Read her books.
Thank
Allegedly,
you.
Monday's Not Coming. I know.
She's like the plot.
She's going to fight me later.
So can you tell everyone what is coming up next, and don't leave anything out because you're really busy?
Jason can start. I'm going to get you later. Well, I have the sequel to The Bells that'll come out around the same time next year. Oh, what am I allowed to talk about? Secrets. I'm going to be announcing that I have a big middle grade series that'll be coming out. It's my answer to J.K. Rowling's and Hogwarts and being left out. Magic School in the Sky with brown kids. What else? Tiffany, what are you talking about? I've probably told her a bunch of stuff in her DMs, and now I can't remember because I've been on tour for 5 days. Lots of travel. Huh? Oh yeah, so Sona and I have a project that'll be coming out in 2020 called The Rumor Game. It's set in the DC area. It's about 3 girls and a rumor that gets out of control and sort of the price that you pay for gossip in high school, which was something huge when I was in high school, and it follows 3 girls from 3 different backgrounds and sort of the political sphere. And that comes out in 2020. What are you working on next?
I've got the last 2 books in the track series. That's spring and fall. I've got a picture book that'll be announced in a couple of weeks probably. That's coming out. I've got a book called For Everyone comes out in April. Adult novel I'm working on, magic book I'm working on, and some secret stuff that I can't talk about right now. Huh? And Long Way Down. I mean, yeah, Long Way Down might be a movie. Yeah, thanks, man. And Ghost is gonna be a TV show. So those are the TV show. The track will be a TV show. So all that's happening, and yeah. So
just busy. Just those things, small, you know. Any final questions?
If anybody's got no questions, why? So why series? Why is it that genre writers never write single books? Almost always they write. It's always more.
You writing a series? You writing a track series? I know it's been burning you up. You've been complaining.
Terrible. I could never do it again. I'm never writing another series. So if you like the track series,
it's game over.
Savor it. No more. Why? What is the deal?
Because the world is so big, and when you do the painful building, when you wait till you get into this magic, because those rules and that world. Look.
Magical realism.
No.
Dip in and dip out.
Look, but when you dip all the way in, the world is so big that there are so many corners that you can explore, and the pain of building the world, there's so many stories that you can find in those spaces. And when you're a genre writer, I don't want to be in your world for one book. Sometimes, like Holly Black does that to me. She'll give me like one book, like The Coldest Girl in Cold Town. I was like, I want another one, but she can return to that world. I don't know. It's tradition. The greats do it. Yeah, the second book burned me up.
All so big, right? You gotta write 500 pages more than one time about the same world.
Yeah.
And you're never like, yo, this is a slog.
It is, but I know, and it hurts. It's painful. It's a pound of flesh. It's the pain cave. It's all those things.
Y'all imagination is on a million.
That's true. We can't know yet? Because we will be negotiating a few more.
Y'all buy this one, there'll be some more.
Right.
It's business, that's how it works. You know?
That's true. Yeah, I mean, there is a second one. Yeah.
Congratulations
Mama
on
Green.
your books.
Yay, hey.
I think the reason why people write series or authors write series is because we want more. We love those characters. We want to see, you know, what happens at the end. You know, surely this isn't it.
Yeah, you know what? That's why I know I'm not made for this. Because I would just be like, you should probably write the next book.
You can do it. You did it with track. It was a great series.
And people have no idea the amount of stress.
I know.
And how rough it's been for me to write those books. It's not fun. I haven't had a good time. I'm grateful.
But why? What is it about staying in the world? Are you bored? Because each character is so interesting.
Yeah, I'm good though. You know what it is? You know what it is? I have a gazillion other ideas, and I'm beholden. Like I'm stuck. I can't move on because when you're writing a series specifically for middle grade.
Yeah, for the little kids.
When you're writing a series for middle grade, you have to get all the books out immediately. So I'm writing a gazillion books a year because I have to keep them coming before kids get out of middle school.
Right.
Before the kids who started those books get out of middle school, right? And it's just not cool. It's not conducive to positive and healthy sort of like my mental health is like wow, like it's just so that's why. Are we good? Two more questions, perfect.
Two more, make them good. Mr. Pinkney. The family's coming through with the questions.
Congratulations.
Thanks so much.
I've known her since she was this big.
I know.
And I'm so proud of you.
Thank you.
She actually took care of my daughters when they were young.
I did. Babysitter Club.
She was a babysitter.
I
used to hear you talk to my daughters. and encourage them and encourage them to be independent and free thinkers and not worry about the outside world. I remember those little nuggets you used to give to them, believe it or not. So my question to you, you talked about, all of these things that occurred when you were a preteen and a teenager, and all the things you thought about your body and fitting into, society, particularly at your schools and so forth. When did you really decide that you wanted to write a book about all of that? I mean, how long ago has it been? I mean, was this something that you've been thinking about since you were 20, 15?
I didn't want to be a writer. I was just a reader. I wanted to be a teacher and a librarian, which I was. But when I studied the canon and I saw that there were so many children missing, I felt like I needed to write into that. And I was actually forced. In my first master's program, they forced me to take a creative writing class. It was like so painful because I can't tell a story without telling the truth, which means I have to put a bit of myself into it. Otherwise, I can't sustain the effort that it takes to do the work. And it's so much work, as you were talking about. You have to reread and rewrite and redo over and over again. And I'm writing books that are 400 to 500 pages. So I didn't set out to be a writer. I set out to be a doctor and failed chemistry, and then returned to books that I loved to read as a kid. And I just really felt like I needed to leave something behind for the little brown kids that didn't get to see themselves and see magic. And I wanted to do that, and that became part of my life's work. And then I met Ellen O. I don't know where she is, president and founder of We Need Diverse Books. She's hiding. She's like, don't bring me up. And it just all came together, and I felt like this is what I need to be doing. This is what I want to leave behind when I exit, are these stories, these truthful stories about myself, about the world, and giving brown kids something to be excited about and something to have fun with. So, yeah, I don't know. I came to it late. I feel like I came to it late. Oh, Russ.
Hey.
Hey.
Sorry for being late. You said a number of things. One thing that's really stood out, as a writer and as a comedian, we say some of the same things you do in the capacity that, no joke is ever finished. Mm-hmm. But how do you trust someone with the ending? Like that, there's no way I would give my jokes up to anybody, there's not a chance. How do you trust someone with your baby?
Well, when you have a good editor like he has, the best editor in the business, I feel like my editor is fantastic. There is a relationship and an intimacy that you have with this person because you're sending them pieces of yourself in manuscript form that are malleable, that are raw. And when I get to the end of a manuscript, I don't want to see it. So I literally physically have been up pulling all-nighters for several days because I'm a perfectionist and I can't get it done. Yeah. He's always on time. I'm always late with it. I just don't plan it as well, and I'm obsessive. Again, I write about obsession, so I'm obsessive that I can't see it. I can't see the end. So I have to trust her, otherwise I can't do this work. I have to trust her that she can help me find my way. Right. And she'll say, okay, you're scratching at 3 things. Here are 3 things to think about. Here are 3 scenes we could do, but think about them and come back with something better than what I've sort of planted. She gives me seeds, and then I sort of do what I want to do.
I don't want to be a bully, but I have one more question. This is the friends and family thing.
But Russ, he's known me forever.
I figured you would speak about it being a relationship because it does command trust. But if it's going to be a relationship, then right, how do you take care of yourself within that relationship? Both of you have spoke at length about the pain and how arduous it is to write something, that and give a lot of yourself up. So how do you take care of yourself in that space?
Oh, you answer.
Well, first, just really quickly, just so no one is disillusioned, every writer, none of us write the books by ourselves. And I think we like to pretend that we do because our name is on the cover, but all of us, including your favorites, have collaborators, and those collaborators are our editors. They really are the second writers. They really help us suss the whole thing out. It's just the way it works in our industry. So first, just so we're clear, because I like to be, it ain't just us, and shout out to the editors. If they are editors here, shout out to the editors. They really are a part of that process in a very real way. In terms of self-care and all of that, man, honestly, for me, struggled terribly. And people who know me, people who know me and have invested in my life or who have seen the work, I mean, like, the truth of the matter is that the way that I work is not healthy. The proliferation of work that I've been able to produce is not healthy. It's just not the way that it's supposed to be done. It's the way that I do it because of fear, because of being hungry, right? Because I've been broke, because I've struggled, because you always think that they're doing you a favor when you have an opportunity to live your dream. And the obsession, and that's somebody who, and you're a comedian, right? So you know this, the obsession that kicks in, rooted in insecurity of falling and failing, creates this life, creates this sort of strange cycle that so many of us live in and don't admit, right? What I've been trying to do as of late, one, I talk to a therapist every day, bro. Every day I talk to a therapist, right? If y'all don't have talk space, it's $150 a month. You could do it from your phone. You can talk to him twice a day, right? So while I'm on the airplane, I'm getting it out. Number two, I go swimming every morning. I'm in the pool. I'm getting in that water. I'm a black person. I believe in the power of water, right? My mom, I'm from that, right? And so I get in the water, man. I get in the water, and I move around, and I swim, and I use it to clear my head and to get things together. And three, I keep my friends close, like real, and my family really, really close to me, like my real friends, right? She called, check up on me. Everybody wants something from you when you on, right? They don't realize that you have nothing else, but they're taking, and you're like, I don't have no more, right? But your friends call you and they ask you how you doing, and that's enough for somebody to not call and say, hey, I need. It's like, no, how you doing? You eating, Jay? You sleeping? Taking care of yourself, right? Like, have you called your mom? Like real stuff, right? So I keep my friends around me. I swim in the morning, try to be active, and I talk to somebody regularly. So it works for me, but it's hard. You know?
Oh, definitely. Some of the similar things, it's also for letting yourself be okay with not getting everything done. I just can't get it all done, and then they have to wait. Nikki Grimes, who's a wonderful poet, told me when I first met her, before my first book came out, I was being rushed to get my manuscript in, staying up till 4 or 5 o'clock in the morning and crashing and burning. And I had some health challenges that were exacerbated by not eating well and not sleeping. She said, why are you letting anybody rush you? Because your name is on that book and on that work, and they have to wait. Nobody is going to die if your book does not come out on that date. She said, never let anyone rush you to the detriment of your health and your work, because it is what you leave behind. And your editor can leave that house, your whole team can leave the publishing house. But to make the work important and make the work true and take your time to get to the truth. So now, deadline, schmedline. Like, I try my best, but I want, oops, sorry, editors. I try to make sure that I'm taking care of myself. And like you said, I do a lot of complaining to Tiffany Jackson in the back in her text messages to this one, and I get it out. I probably should talk to someone and find someone to talk to, but in New York, there's a shortage of folks. Yeah. I just signed up for Clear because you told me to do that. That was a game changer for me. Yeah. And so I think just making sure that I have to have my places where I can be petty and like let it out and just like not be judged. I live in a petty mansion and I have cottages that I rent out on my land. And I need to be able to have that space with my... Pull it back. I just need to be able to be myself, and I need those spaces. I'm embarrassing Tiffany. Tiffany's like, oh no. But yeah, that's the honest. I've known him forever. You've known me for 2 decades. So, but yeah. Yeah.
We give them a great round.
Yay, thank you so much for coming.